Hi there and welcome to the video. In this video we are going to look at increasing values and decreasing values by a percentage. In this video we're going to cover the calculator method of increasing and decreasing an amount by a percentage. If we look at the first question on the screen, increasing 84 by 22%, we could approach this by finding 10% and doubling it to have 20%. Finding 1% and doubling it to find 2%, putting all that together to find the 22% and then adding it on to the 84. That would be the non-calculator method. But what we're going to aim for is a quicker, more efficient method by using the calculator. So if you were asked to increase 84 by 22%, this is what your working out could look like. Okay, so if we look at the left-hand side of the screen, what we've done here is 84 in this question is 100% of the amount in the question. 100% of the quantity in this question is 84, which is why I've started with 100%. And I want to increase that 100% by another 22%, which is why I've added 22% on. So what I'm actually interested in is I want to find out 122% of 84. That would be the equivalent of increasing 84 by 22%. So I'm going to take this percentage and I'm going to convert it into a decimal. We convert percentages into decimals by dividing by 100. So 122% becomes 1.22. And this in the green box is very important in this topic. We call it the decimal multiplier. So once we know how to calculate these decimal multipliers quite quickly and efficiently, the calculation we have to do on the calculator is very straightforward. We take the amount in the question and multiply it by the decimal multiplier. So in this case, it was 1.22. This decimal multiplier represents a 22% increase because it's 22 more than 100%. So I'd go ahead and put that into my calculator. 84 times 1.22. That's going to tell me that 84 increased by 22% is 102.48. So we've used the calculator method to work out the question. Let's have a go at another example. Remember, you do have the ability to pause the video, so if you want to go ahead and answer the questions yourself, by all means, pause the video and go ahead before my explanation. This time I'm asked to increase 223 by 30%. My working out is going to look like this. This time, 100% of the question, 100% of the quantity in the question is 223. So I'm always starting with 100%. I want to increase by 30%, so I've added 30 onto that 100, so I'm dealing with 130%. I now want to change that into a decimal multiplier. So I take my 130, divide by 100 to leave me with 1.30, or we could call that 1.3, because removing this 0 does not affect the value of the decimal. So an increase by 30% as a decimal multiplier is represented by 1.3. So then I go ahead and use my calculator. 223 multiplied by that decimal multiplier of 1.3 is going to tell me that my answer is 289.9. So the 1.3 represents a 30% increase, this representing the 30 and the 1 representing the original 100%. So that, again, the decimal multiplier being vitally important into the method of this answer. We can do the same for decrease questions. There's just a couple of subtle differences in our method. If you're asked to decrease a value by 8%, so 140 decreased by 8%, your method's going to look like this. We're still going to start with 100% because 100% in this question is 140. But this time we are decreasing by 8%. What we actually want to do is we want to subtract 8% from the original 100%. So that's where I end up with 92%. So this is the subtle difference I was talking about. When it's a decrease question, we are going to subtract the percentage that we're dealing with. So what I actually want to find is 92% of 140. So I'm going to change that 92% into a decimal multiplier, again by dividing by 100. That leaves me with a decimal multiplier of 0.92. It's less than 1, and that's what we should expect, because we're decreasing the value. We want less than 100%. So you would expect your decimal multiplier on a decrease question to be smaller than 1. Then I go ahead and put it into my calculator. 140 times 0.92 is going to give me a value of 128.8. So the method, very similar to an increase question, apart from at this point here, we're doing a subtract, and you're expecting your decimal multiplier to be less than 1. One more example from me. Again, you can pause the video if you want to work ahead with this question. I want to decrease 158 by 12.4%. We're dealing with a slightly trickier percentage, but the method is essentially going to be the same. I'm going to start with my 100%, and because it's a decrease question, I'm going to take away 12.4% because that's what I'm reducing this value by. That's what I'm decreasing by. That means I'm dealing with a percentage of 87.6%. I take that 87.6 and I change it into a decimal multiplier by dividing by 100. So that gives me 0.876. This is the decimal multiplier I'm interested in for this calculation. Then I go ahead and plug that into my calculator. 158 times 0.876. And that's going to tell me that 158 decreased by 12.4% is 138.408. Again, my decimal multiplier began with a 0. It was less than 1 because we are decreasing. We're subtracting from 100. So the expectation is this decimal multiplier will be less than 1. Okay, so here is your first task. What I've done here is I've displayed 6 questions on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right-hand side of the screen, I've displayed the decimal multiplier that would go with that question. So what I would like you to do is match the question to the correct decimal multiplier, but one of the decimal multipliers does not match up and is therefore the odd one out. I would also like you to highlight the odd one out. Okay, could you pause the video at this point? And could you match up the question to the decimal multiplier you would use within that question? Okay, welcome back. Just have a little look at the correct matchings. So your correct matchings should look something like this. So for example, if we're increasing by 35%, that would be 100 add 35 divided by 100, giving me 1.35. If we're decreasing by 0.5% or 0.5, that would be 100 subtract 0.5, which would give me 99.5, which I would then divide by 100, giving me the decimal multiplier 0.995. The odd one out here is the one highlighted in red. If we're increasing by 107%, that would mean 100 add 107, which is 207, Then I would divide by 100 to leave me with 2.07. This decimal multiplier here would represent a 7% increase because this 1 represents the 100 of the original amount. It does not express that extra 100% increase. So that is why increasing by 107%, because it's over 100% increase, we'd actually be dealing with 2.07. So this is your odd one out. Very well done if you were able to match up the correct decimal multipliers. Okay, so here is your main task. What I would like you to do is I would like you to copy out the following table. 4 columns with the titles question, working, decimal multiplier, and answer. And you're going to end up putting a lot of information in the correct order into these columns. The information that I want you to use to populate these columns is on this slide here. So you can see I've got 8 decimal multipliers, which should match up to 8 questions, which should match up to 8 bits of method, 8 working outs, which should match up to 8 answers, 8 solutions. So all the information on this slide is mixed up. I would like you to put it in the correct order and place it into these columns. So once you've drawn out the correct columns, once you've drawn out your answer table, I would like you to pause the video on this slide and have a go at populating the table correctly by matching up all the questions with their correct working, correct multiplier, and correct answer. Could you pause the video now and have a go at this task? Okay, welcome back. Very well done if you were able to complete that task. For the solutions, it should be self-marking, because if you were able to place every bit of information in the table, then you can read through the question. Does that match up with the multiplier? Does that match up with the answer and the working? And you should be able to self-assess whether you've completed the table correctly. Very well done if you give that a good go. Okay, next task. I've placed on the screen 4 exam questions. So just to show you how this topic is often examined, here are 4 typical exam questions. So you can have a look at the wording of the question, you can have a look at how the question is presented. 4 very typical exam questions using the method we've discussed in this video. Could you pause the video at this point? For each of the 4 questions, show me a full working out and how you would go about finding the solutions to all 4 questions. Could you pause the video now, please? Okay, welcome back. I'll just go ahead and show you my full working out for each question. So my working out looks something like this. So very similar method to what we've seen in the previous half of the video. You're always starting with 100% because percentages are always out of 100. If it's a decrease question, like the first 3 here, you're subtracting. Then you're dividing by 100 to find your decimal multiplier. Then you're going ahead and using your calculator to find the solution. Question 4 was an increase question. So we're adding on to that 100, dividing by 100 to get our decimal multiplier. Because it's an increase question, we expect the decimal to start with a 1, unless it was over 100% increase, of course. Then we go ahead, take the value in the question, times it by the decimal multiplier to get your solution. So you can see how your working out should look when it comes round to exam questions. Okay, last task to have a go at. If you need a little bit more practice with this topic, if you need a little bit more confidence with this topic, then please have a go at the questions on the screen. Using the same method I just showed you on the previous slide, how I approached the exam questions would be exactly how you should approach these consolidation questions. So could you pause the video now and have a go at the questions A to H? Okay, welcome back. I'll just go ahead and display the answers to these questions. Your answers should look like so. Take a little bit of time to mark and assess your work, and very well done if you were able to answer these questions right, and especially very well done if you were able to answer all the 4 exam questions with full working out. That's brilliant. You've shown a good understanding of increasing and decreasing using percentages.